Have you ever taken into consideration how white privilege affects modern parenting? Hey ladies, I am back. I've been off for a few weeks. I got a cold and then my voice was completely gone and I was traveling. So I did what I do best and I gave myself permission to listen to my body and to rest and restore. And I did it with no guilt. Even though you guys were emailing saying, what's up? Is everything okay? Yes, everything is fine and dandy. We just needed some recovery time. So I know at the beginning of 2019, I made a promise to myself and to you that I was going to podcast every single day for a whole year. And so far, so good. I've missed a day here or there, not including the last 2 weeks. But it was actually really nice to know that I needed a break and to give myself that break instead of trying to kill myself to deliver on my goal. I'm not saving babies here, and I know we have over 500 episodes, so I assumed that if you missed me, you would check out the other episodes. That said, we are going to kick off this week with another amazing podcast interview. And today is all about Mercedes. Mercedes is a registered social worker. She is a parenting educator, and she is all about helping parents understand diversity in parenting, helping children and parents communicate with each other, manage emotional trauma, navigate social media and technology together, and develop the healthy parent-child relationship. She started the End Parent Shaming movement, as well as coined the term shame-proof parenting, using both bringing awareness to end parent shame. So here's the thing. A few months ago, I posted something on Facebook, and I said, I want to start having diverse conversations in parenting. Well, that opened a can of worms, and that can of worms went, I don't want to say down a rabbit hole, but it got me talking to a lot of different people because I'm like, listen, I am a white woman parenting in 2019. I am in a heterosexual relationship. I'm a cisgendered female. There are many, and I'm married. I was previously divorced, but that's another topic. But listen, there are a million different ways that we can parent. And here's the thing. One thing that I always get stuck in the way when I'm talking to people is, am I good enough? Am I doing this correctly? And the answer is yes, because it doesn't matter what parenting book you read or what strategy you are following. You need to realize that it is going to be unique to you, your child, your situation. And we are not even taking into consideration culture and generational trauma and parenting, like beliefs and values. So I have some really, really good interviews coming up in the coming weeks to really crack you open to this conversation and this topic. They have made me wildly uncomfortable and have also taught me a lot about myself and the things that we're just oblivious to from the fact that we are growing up in a not only white privileged culture, and I'm a white woman, but also understanding that we are living in a day and age where you are listening to me on your cell phone with internet access while you're traveling the world, while you're doing whatever the heck you want to do. We are living in a global age where you can literally place yourself. You can get on a plane today and be in China in like 12 hours. So my point is we're so more connected than we've ever been. And because we're so more connected than we've ever been, we're also more disconnected to ourselves. And we're trying to figure out, who am I? What do I believe in? Where did my values come from? Is this in alignment with me? And so my mission, the more I dive into these conversations and the more I'm coaching people, is realizing, what does your gut say? What does your soul say? Who do you want to be in the world? And how do you want to feel as a mother? How do you want to feel as a wife? How do you want to feel as a caregiver? So, super excited for you to dive into today's podcast interview. So let me know. Send us an email at support@heatherchauvin.com or Instagram. Check me out. Send me a private message at Mom is in Control. And before we dive into that, I also want to give you a heads up that starting Monday, I'm actually doing a free challenge on Instagram. And when you register for this free challenge, I'm going to send you a 12-page workbook to follow along with the challenge that also has a whole bunch of journal prompts, because you guys always ask me for journal prompts. And this is really going to help you dive deeper into your parenting process. So the challenge is called the Good Enough Parent Unchallenge, because I'm actually fucking sick of challenges. So it's actually an unchallenge. And there's 5 days, and I'm going to be talking about the 5 most questions, or the top questions that I get asked about parenting, and I'm going to debunk them for you. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but there's going to be a lot of self-reflective questions for you to explore deeper within yourself of, why do I not feel like I'm doing enough as a parent? And hello, we need tools and strategies too. So I'm going to give you some specific actions as well. So if you want to take charge of this and register and get that free worksheet, then head on over to where are you going? momIsincontrol.com/challenge. So that's momIsincontrol.com/challenge. All right, let's dive into today's interview. Welcome to the podcast, Mercedes. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yay. Okay. So a while ago, I talked about wanting to have more diverse conversations on the podcast, and I forget how we connected, but someone tagged you, and I was doing research, and, I found you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this woman is a rock star. And we connected, and you're all about shame-proof parenting, and you have a diversity in parenting conference. Actually, we're recording this a few days before your conference. So I said, thank you, because I know how that must feel mentally when you're preparing. And this is your first conference, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Amazing. So we'll get into that, what the conference is going to be about. But I really want to have this conversation with you because a lot of times, we were talking about diversity in parenting and you being that voice for inclusion. So let's start there.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I even came up with the conference and that topic in general is because, as a parent coach myself, as a licensed clinical social worker working in the family sector, working with parents and children, I noticed that I kept seeing the same types of families represented. And that type of family is cisgender, heterosexual, affluent white family. And I saw that reflected in every webinar series and almost every lucrative parenting coach and almost every parenting book. And what upset me was that I know that there's more types of parents that raise children. And I started to question, why don't we see more representation in this field? Not just in the parenting field, I feel like in the mental health field in general, but my wheelhouse is parenting and families. And I was like, why aren't we seeing more representation of the different types of families that raise children? Why is it that only this one type of family is consistently and constantly represented when we're talking about parenting tips and parenting strategies and how to raise healthy children?
I think it's beautiful. And I love how you just took charge of this and decided to be that leader, right? Like, we need to be the change we want to see in the world. And when we're looking out there saying, why isn't there? It's kind of, that's our calling to be that person, right? To lead the next generation. And the interesting thing is, you are not actually a parent. No. And sometimes you get this question of like, well, how can you help us with parenting if you're not a parenting? And how do you reply to that?
Usually, what I say is, and I've gone through my own journey about this myself, but I usually say, I'm the adult child that you're trying to raise. And a lot of my parents really appreciate that because I think when you are in the middle of parenting, it's hard to have that foresight of who can my kid be? Where can my kid actually be? And what I really like to focus on with myself is that not only am I the adult child you're trying to raise, but I want parents to get this holistic view of what that can look like, not just on the financial and career and college academic space, but also in the emotional space. How do I raise a child who also, along with all those other amazing attributes, can also navigate the world in an emotionally healthy way, in an emotionally intelligent way? And so I'd like to help parents see that I'm the person that you're trying to raise. So let's work together so I can show you what that might look like.
I think that's really important. I see a lot of people, with the imposter syndrome of I'm not qualified, and we are all children, right? The adult
Yeah.
versions of a child.
Yeah.
And I think when we're coming from that place of, listen, I'm not showing you what my day to day looks like raising a child. Like that's not like my expertise, but there's so much inner work, and it's a beautiful, when you can have that outsider opinion going, hello, like look at this, right? Like look from this aspect. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story and what inspires you to be the trailblazer that you are in this area of parenting?
Yeah, so I was raised in kind of a what's called a kinship family. So my step grandmother raised me, and part of that healing process, because it wasn't the most healthy environment growing up in terms of emotionality. There's a lot of emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse in that relationship. But one of the things that inspired me to actually work with parents is to realize what you just said, which is that every parent comes from somewhere. And how does that influence their parenting identity? How does it influence what they believe about their caregiver role and their caregiver duties? And as I was on my own healing journey from my childhood experiences with my grandmother, I realized that she came from somewhere. And there's something about her life that taught her to be a certain type of parent. And her culture and the community we lived in and her religion and all of those things coalesced to her believing that the way she was raising me was the right way to do it. And so when I talk to parents now, I talk to them about that, this whole idea of how did you come to understand your parenting identity? How did you come to understand what you would do once you became a caregiver? And it's in those conversations that I really started to realize, number one, that we all have a parenting identity before we actually take care of children. And number two, that our society horribly prepares people to become parents. And then lastly, number three, once a parent does start caring for a child, it's really difficult to take that step back and be reflective of your parenting identity and who you are. And so that's one of the reasons why I really want to talk about it so people can start naming what it is and really start looking at how can they cultivate a healthy parenting identity. And all of that came from my own journey, like I said, being raised by my grandmother, and then also my own healing.
I love this. So I've heard you talk about parenting identity before. So for those of you who, or those listening saying, what is parenting identity? Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how this whole concept of diversity plays into that? Because, you've at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about how inclusion just wasn't a part of what you were seeing in the education. And so why is it so important, like parenting identity, but also seeing other people that look like you when they're trying to help you with parenting?
Yeah. What came to mind when you said that is what I saw with so many different types of cultures outside of the homogeneous kind of cisgender heterosexual white family. And every time we would talk about parenting education, I would get this kind of retort or variations of this retort of, oh, that's for white people. We don't do that. And going into answering your question from that statement, I think it's so important that when we talk about parenting identity and representation, that it's very hard to cultivate an identity if you never see examples of it out in the world, if you never see examples of it that resonate with who you are, your culture, your race, your sexual identity, your gender identity, your religious and spiritual identity. If you never see that out in the world, it's really hard to cultivate a healthy sense of your identity as a parent because no one's representing that out in the world. And so parenting identity is the person that you believe yourself to be as a caregiver. What role do you believe you have? What duties do you believe you're supposed to do? It even goes into what you believe the role of a child is in your family, and what do you believe about how a family is supposed to operate. And so all of that comes together to form your parenting identity. And if you think about all those different pieces, and then you think about the ways in which parenting education in the parenting world is offered to us and given to us, there's not a lot of representation for anybody who's not cisgender, who's not heterosexual, and who's not affluent and white to see themselves reflected back in a lot of that. And I think it's really important for us to show more diversity, more inclusion, more representation, so families of color, families from different identities, families from different family systems can see themselves and say, we're being represented. I can cultivate a parenting identity because there's more people who look like me, who sound like me, who understand the systemic issues that I'm dealing with. And I think that's what really helps when it comes to cultivating a healthy identity. And that's across the board. If I'm trying to cultivate a healthy racial identity as an African American woman, but I never see any healthy representation of myself out in the world, that's going to be difficult for me. Same thing with this parenting identity idea. If I don't see any healthy representations of who I am as a parent and what my family looks like, then it's going to be really difficult for me to cultivate healthy visions and healthy representations of what I should be doing and how it might be best for me to be in a certain mindset for what I'm doing.
So what I'm hearing you say is the importance of being a role model, right? Like
Yeah.
and when you see a lack, not a lack or a gap in the system, then become that person, right? Like become that person. And I always say you need to become the person you most desire your child to be, which is very, this has nothing to do with race, but my point is it's becoming, right? Like becoming that person, that human being that you want the next generation to be positively influenced by. And we need more people to step up and to take that lead. So
Yeah.
what do you say to that person who comes to your parenting class that said that's for white people? Like that's what white parents do. Like how do you reply to things like that when they're like, yeah, you're right, but what are you going to do about it?
So I want to answer that, but I want to take a step back. You said something just a second ago where you said, I always challenge parents to be the person they want their child to be. And then you kind of mentioned that has nothing to do with race. But actually, I think it does. And I think it has to do with every aspect of a parent's identity. Because if I am African American, if I am Latinx, if I am Chinese American or Asian American, if I am transgender, if I am LGBTQIA, all of that is a part of who I am as a person. And if I'm not aware of that, then how do I help my child come into their different identities as well? And so I think, if I can be honest with you, coming into your parenting identity also means becoming a part of, or really looking at who am I holistically, not just as a parent, but as a human in general. How do I feel about my race, my gender, my sexual orientation, my religious identity? What do I believe about these groups of people? Because my child most likely will be in those different identities as well, especially until my child grows into a space where they can figure out how they want to express themselves and how they want to show up in the world. And so I think all of our identities have a huge impact and influence on the person we want to be, so we can help our child be the healthy version of themselves as well. So I do want to say that I think it is about all of our identities, including race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and those things like that.
True. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And then going back to your question, I think what's important to tell people is this, and I really always say this, especially now. The reason why you feel like it's for white people is because that's the only types of families that's ever represented. But what I want to teach you, and what I hope others will teach you on your parenting journey, is that it's really about, how do I cultivate a healthy sense of being human in this world for your child? Right. And that encompasses everything I just said. So when I'm looking at different cultures of parents, when I'm looking at different identities of parents, when I'm looking at different family systems, adopted parents, foster parents, things like that, kinship parents, I ask them, what do you believe about making a healthy person? And then if you take that belief system and think about, is this a healthy belief system? Does this create a healthy person? Then it doesn't matter if it's for white people or not. You're thinking now about your parenting. You're thinking now about, how can I create a healthy person? And that starts with what you just said. It starts with, who are you? Are you healthy? Are you committed to working through things? Are you committed to helping yourself be emotionally and mentally healthy? If you are, then that's not something that's only held by a certain group of people. That's something that is accessible to everybody, every identity, that ability to want to be healthy, that identity to want to create a healthy space for our children, that that ability to want to see our children be healthy as well. That's something that transcends race or gender or sexual orientation. That's something that is accessible to all of us.
Yeah, but yeah, we really have to look at our belief systems around that, right? And why we think we don't deserve something, or that it's
Yes.
only for one group of people.
Yes. Agreed.
So what inspired you to create, is it called Diversity in Parenting Conference?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. So at the time that this is live, the conference has already been completed, and you're probably feeling a little more mental stability, or like, this is your first year, and I know you've had huge success with enrollment. So yeah, just what inspired this? What kind of energy is around it? What are you expecting for the day? It looks amazing, and I can't wait to hear about it.
Um, the first one, I'm just expecting people to come and be open to hearing about different family systems, to seeing different types or a diverse group of speakers. I know you've probably been to conferences before as a professional, and so have I. And it's always very homogeneous, isn't it? It's always the same type of speakers, the same caliber of speakers. And it almost feels like there's never any space for innovation, to see something new, to see someone who is really bringing a fresh voice to whatever the topic is. And that was something that I was thinking about with diversity in parenting, where I've seen many parenting conferences, and I've been to a few live ones, and it's always kind of the same ideas and the same types of people speaking. And I really wanted to bring together not just different topics in families and parenting, but also to bring about different types of speakers. My speaker roster is so diverse. There's so many different types of people speaking. And that's something that's important to me, going back to that idea of representation and inclusion. If I see African American, Latinx people talking about positive parenting and getting rid of outdated parenting practices, I could say, you know what? Okay, maybe this isn't just some type of parenting education only for a select group of people. This might be something that's for me as well. This might be something that I can actually incorporate into my parenting as well. And then the other thing that I'm looking at is, this is really highlighted as being a professional conference, because I also want professionals who are out there in the world to realize we've got to speak to different types of people and different types of parents. And how do we do that if there's no trainings, there's no professional conferences, there's no workshops on what these systems look like? And so I'm really geared towards professionals also embracing this idea of representation and inclusion and not being so exclusive all the time.
I think it's so important because, being a formal social worker, there's not a lot of training in that. And if it is, it's usually like a government required 20-minute video that you have
Yep.
to watch and check off the box.
Yep.
But you don't realize how much discrimination and privilege is involved in your work, right? I
Yes.
will always say, I did take a workshop once. It had nothing to do, it was about poverty, and it was called Bridging Poverty or something like that. And I was in a room, it was like a day workshop. I'm almost certain that the room was full of white people, and the presenter was white as well. And we were just talking about poverty and how we bridge this gap. And I liked that she was very gritty. And when I say gritty, she was like honest and authentic, and there was no bullshit in her presentation. And at the end, she was like, guys, it's a culture. Like, you're not coming here to save anybody. You have to realize that you live in a different culture than these people. And it's not you fixing them and taking them. You have to meet them where they're at and realize what's going on. And to be able to bridge that gap and to really support these people, you have to realize all your shit that you're bringing to the table and your privilege as well. And it was a big aha moment for me, like a complete mindset shift, because after leaving that, I realized even in my university education, we weren't taught that. It was like, everyone needs to be fixed and saved. And it's like, no, we need to meet each other where we're at and listen to each other and realize we all have different life experiences and belief systems and stories that we tell ourselves. And it's about holding space for each other and listening. There's no like savior needed. Like, it's all about guidance and really kind of going to a different, I don't want to say level, but calming down the fucking ego to be listen. So what are some topics that people are going to be presenting at the conference?
So we're talking about non-traditional families. We're talking about adoption in the LGBTQIA community, feminism and parenting, which I'm really excited about. There's one person going to be talking about the racist signatures in parenting and how sometimes inadvertently we pass down racism to our children. We're talking about technology and its effects on children, postpartum depression, talking about ADHD and ODD, these two very overdiagnosed, sometimes diagnoses in different cultural settings and how they look. We are talking about eating disorders in a cultural context. We also have something that I'm interested in doing and bringing more to the table is having more men in the parenting space. And so I think I've got about 4 male speakers. One in particular is talking about where are the men and how do we cultivate a sense of success and a sense of identity in men who take on the fatherhood role or take on the father role. And so these are just topics we're talking about teens and this current generation and how do we support them. So just a lot of topics on how do we look at families, how do we look at the different pieces of a family, and how do we support them, how do we bring them into the current world and say things don't look like they did 50 years ago. Families have evolved, families have changed, and we need to start talking about the different pieces that come together to make a full family and how do we support those different pieces. I think we also have someone talking about, what does a family look like after divorce, right? Just different things that we don't talk about oftentimes, especially as it comes to different family systems. One person is talking about step parents and step family success. These are topics that honestly, I've never seen at a professional conference before when it comes to thinking about how do we counsel, how do we support, how do we help families if we're not talking about the various ways that a family can come together and be.
I love it. I guarantee you're going to walk away and be like, mind is blown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I asked you this, I think, kind of before we started recording, what the legacy is that you want to leave.
I want to be known as the person who changed the way that we prepared people to become parents. I think that we have to stop seeing parenting as something that we just do as humans,
Mhm.
and we see it as something that people have to really come into. We have to really learn, how do we still be human ourselves and still be on this human journey, and then have to show another human how to do this. How do we do that? And what does that look like? It's called parenting, but I think a lot of people just kind of think you're going to become a parent and you'll be fine. We do not think about the nuances and the intricacies and the complicated nature it is to be a parent and to be still human ourselves. And so, with all of that, like I said, I just want to be known as the person who changed the way that we help people become parents.
Mm. It's interesting because when you were talking, I was thinking, it hasn't been that long, and maybe you know more than I do, since children have actually had rights and like a voice.
Yes,
Before children were just, what did they say, seen and not heard, and we had
correct.
children for, labor and stuff. So,
Yes.
do you know when that movement was, where children had rights?
I don't know the exact date, but you're correct that it is very recent. And I think it's very much a cultural shift. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's something that everybody has gotten on board with. And this is why representation and diversity and inclusion is so important, because every culture and every identity has its own understandings about how children are supposed to be seen and how
Yeah.
parents are supposed to care for those children. So even on our Western society, we think, okay, we've got it figured out. But then when you look at the smaller groups within that society, we still have a lot of work to do. And we can't do that work if we're not showing up and saying, let's bring these people to the table. Let's bring these discussions to the table to talk about. Right? We can't just say, well, everyone thinks this and everyone needs to get on board. That's nice. But if you don't care about how each culture sees child rearing, how each culture views raising children and views who children are, you're going to miss a lot of people. And we're going to still see those same cycles of abuse and those same cycles of trauma. So I believe that even though it's a very recent thing, we still have to get in there and understand how everybody really sees children and how everybody really sees child rearing to create long lasting change.
Yeah. And I think it's really important if every person in the room at your conference created their own conference, it's like a drop in the bucket, right? It's
Yeah.
it's such a
Yeah.
little tiny butterfly effect. And I know for a lot of the families that I attract, they're always like, how do I get my partner on board? And I'm like, you just have to be the change. Like, you can't
Yes. Yes.
manipulate somebody into changing their belief systems and how they've grown up. It's just, once you are aware of something, and this is one thing I see, and I don't know if there's a terminology for this. This is one thing that I see that people do that I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's actually detrimental. So we've kind of swung the pendulum to, have children, keep them alive, right? And
Yeah.
just, if they don't act, just beat the crap out of them or scream at them, right? Like
Right.
abuse, trauma. Going to the other side, where like a bubble wrapped children, right? Like the lawnmowers, the hover parents, the helicopters, whatever you want to call them. And of course, culturally across the board, it's going to be very, very different. So everyone has their own belief systems about this, and they're kind of looking like, show me the way, show me the way. Like, where's the template? Where's the one size fix all? That book, what to expect when you're expecting. And I'm just like, this is so stupid. Like, nobody knows what they're doing because they're so disconnected from themselves, and
Yes.
they're looking for outside support. And so here we are getting research from 60-year-old white men who write these books, and it's like, here you go. And it's like, we need to be having more conversations of like, that doesn't work for me. So the whole
Yes.
point of why I said this at the beginning is, I will come in contact with a lot of women, especially, who get perfectionists or perfectionism around parenting. And they're like, well, I read it in the book this way. And I'm like, but does it feel good? Like, is it working for you? Well, no, I have so much guilt and shame around this way, or I'm frustrated, or it doesn't feel good. I'm like, but you're not trusting yourself. And it's not a one size fits all. So there's so many different pieces and parts to this that we really have to start asking ourselves, like you said, who am I? What are my beliefs? How do I see my children? How do I see the world? Where do I fit into all of this? What feels good to me? What works for us, my family, my child, regardless of their abilities, and education? Like, there's so many questions we have to ask ourselves. So what do you say to those parents that are like, this is overwhelming. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what works for me or my child or who I am. And, you kind of crack people open to, how do you want to live your life? How do you want to feel as a parent? So what do you say to that conversation?
Yeah, well, a lot of the topics you just brought up are actually in my book. So, in my book, Shame Proof Parenting, I talk a lot about this idea that there is no such thing as a one size fits all parenting manual, and that you actually have to get very proactive about creating your own parenting manual. What does your parenting identity look like? What do you want to do in your family? And I think it's really important, like you said, for the parent to start with themselves. Who are you? What are you about? What are you bringing to your family? What is your partner or your co-parent bringing to the family? Like, how are we going to decide on strategies and ideas and perspectives that actually work for us to create a healthy family environment? A lot of times parents, I think, are just focusing on their kids and making sure their kids are healthy, but it doesn't make any sense for you to be unhealthy and still carrying around a lot of trauma and weight and think that that's not going to in some way kind of bleed out on your family, right? It is. And so it's really important for you to start off with, who am I? What work do I want to get done? How do I accomplish this? The interesting thing is that a lot of times when I talk about being the person who changes the way that we prepare people for parenting, is I go back to, we tell people all the time, I've even been told this, you're going to be such a good parent one day. And I always say, how do you know that?
Mm.
How do you know? And I get these blank stares because they don't really know. It's just a nice, polite thing to say, or they think because I love kids or they've seen me with nieces and nephews that I'll be great with my own. But they don't realize that there's this internal process that comes when you are raising another human 24/7 that has never been tested before until you are raising another human 24/7. And those pieces of yourself get exposed. And if you don't know how to get support, and you don't know how to acknowledge it, and you don't know how to bring awareness to it, it's going to spill out. It's going to be very difficult for you to have a healthy home environment where everybody can cultivate healthy identities if you've never, or you don't even know how to deal with that stuff. And so when it comes to what you're sharing about how do we do this, there is no ABCD how to do it. It's all about taking stock of, who am I? What do I need to become aware of? We can't really change our past or even change what happened to us, but we can really start to look at, how does this affect me now? Things that have happened to me already change the way I see myself and my world, and how is that going to affect how I raise my child, how I create a family environment? All of those things take a lot of proactive work. And if we don't tell people that or prepare people for that before they become parents, we're really doing a huge disservice. We're doing a huge disservice to people thinking, oh, you look like a nice person, you'll be a great mom. Oh, you are so good with kids, you'll be a great dad. If we can change that rhetoric and really start telling people, hey, take some time for you, take some time to understand you before you become a parent. So that way, when you have another human to take care of, it makes sense. You understand the human process because you've given yourself time to understand your own human process. I think that's how we kind of create the quote unquote parenting manual, the ABCD, if you will, by really understanding ourselves and what it means to be human. So that way, when we have another human to take care of, we're not so confused by their own human processes.
I love this. I always say parenting is personal growth on
Yeah.
steroids.
Yep.
And for those people who are always like, oh, I got to get it perfect, before I got to live my life and save all this money and do all this before I have kids, I'm like, good luck,
Yeah.
because you really don't know what to expect. But I think what you mentioned about the importance of understanding you so that you can understand the human process. I just think about, I always tell the story about how my first product that I created was called Teach Your Kid to Meditate. Because I was like, you need to meditate. You're crazy. And
Yeah.
my son was like projecting, or not projecting, he was mirroring everything that I was the one who needed to meditate. And it's not that I couldn't teach him mindfulness. It was, how can we teach people or lead people in a way if we have not practiced those skills ourselves? And I know it's, this whole podcast, Mom is in Control. People are like, oh my gosh, I feel so out of control. I got to listen to this podcast. I'm like, the essence of control is not to be controlling. It is to lead the way. But if
Yeah.
someone's like, oh, can you teach me how to do this? How do you make banana bread? And you're like, well, I don't know. I've never made banana bread. But if you've done it weekly for the, years and years, you're like, oh, that's so easy. Right. So if we don't know how to manage our big emotions, we're not going to, know how to teach our children about, if we don't understand cultural identity, race identity, parenting identity, having these conversations, understanding culture, how the fuck are we supposed to be able to teach that shit to our kids, or even just open that conversation with them?
Yep. I agree with that. And you made a good point of, if I don't know how to do something, how do I teach someone else? Right. And I love your example of banana bread, where it's like, if I don't know how to make that and someone asks me, we're both going to be the blind leading the blind in the kitchen trying to figure things out with Google and recipes and things like that. And I feel like a lot of times that's how parents start off their parenting, because someone said, well, you're good at being a parent, or you look like a good parent, or why haven't you had kids yet, or what are you going to do with your life? You've done all this stuff, but you don't have kids. And it makes people feel like I got to rush into doing this without really taking stock of, do I want this?
Yeah.
Without really taking stock of, is this a journey that I actually want to take? And I think it's really important to think about it that way. It's not so much a life checkbox where, okay, I've got the degree, I've got the career, now I can get, and I got the partner, now I can get the kid in the house, right? It's not check boxes. It's really a whole nother journey you're agreeing to, right? You're saying, I want to take another journey. I've already done the degree journey. I've already done the X and the Y journey. Now I want to take a journey of being a human while raising another human. And I think if we can conceptualize it like that, it allows people to make a healthier decision. And I think people who are ready to take that journey will say, yes, I'm ready to go on this journey of helping another human find out who they are, while at the same time finding out who I am on this journey. That's such a healthier concept than just saying, I'm going to be a parent because I love kids, or I'm going to be a parent because that's what I'm supposed to do now. I'm 25, I'm 30, I've had all these other experiences. It's time for me to have a kid. I don't think that conceptualization works anymore.
There's nothing more annoying than a previous generation telling you that you are still in child rearing years.
Yes.
So you should just have another. And Heather, you have
Yeah.
3 boys. Like, don't you want a girl? And I was
Yeah.
like, one, I'm not God. And two, I'm not fucking buying new shoes. Like,
Yeah.
what part of this don't you understand? This isn't like get 3, get 1 for free. Like, what the fuck? How messed up are people? And they don't even know any health, like paying attention to any concerns with health.
Yep.
If I truly wanted to have another child, or it's going to happen without their opinion of the life that I need to lead. I've literally gotten into debate and argument with people who just will not shut their mouth
Yes.
over how I should live my life with
Right.
regarding when it comes to child rearing and parenting. And, when I just try to shut it down, I was like, nope, I'm done. Meanwhile, it triggers all my grief of like
Yes.
why I can't have more children, or,
Yes.
it's like, shut the fuck up. Like,
Yeah.
mind your own business. Why don't you just have more babies of your own if you want other people to have them so bad. But it you know, there's so many conversations that people, it's like, it's none of your fucking
Don't need to have.
business. Yeah.
And they don't need to have it. What you're talking about actually reminds me of a Facebook post of a friend of mine, and she was announcing her baby announcement, but she wrote this beautiful post about how her and her husband had infertility issues, and she's the same age as me. And so at this age, people are expecting you to have kids, and I think her and her husband had been married for some time, so people kept asking, when, not having any clue of their infertility issues and how they were struggling, and how, she talked about this one instance where they had just had a miscarriage, but they had already agreed to go to some event. So they kind of dealt with that during the day. And then that night they went to this event, and everybody there began to ask, when are you guys going to do it? Are you guys trying? And she said that was the most excruciating day of her life, because everyone is so hell-bent on telling you when. No one actually knows how difficult it can be sometimes to bring a child into the world. And I think that's one of the things that we have to really change in our society, where it's like, don't just expect people to have kids. Ask people how they're doing, ask people what their plans are, but allow them to share with you, we're trying, we're not trying, we don't want kids, we've decided to adopt, whatever it is, and make it a safe space for people to decide how they want to share with you whether or not they're going to bring children into the world and how they want to do it. Because when we just assume that you're at the right quote unquote age to have kids, we are ignoring so many people who struggle with fertility, who struggle and go back and forth on whether they want to have kids, who have already had one, and like you said, have the grief of, do I want another or not? There's so much that goes into deciding, should we bring children into the world, that just to ask or suspect or just expect people to do it is so excruciatingly painful for a lot of people. And so I think this post just really resonates with what you're saying, where it's none of our business to ask people when they're going to have kids. And it's really none of our business to even tell people you'd be a great parent, because we don't know. No one knows for sure.
Yeah. And someone might be a fabulous parent, but they don't want children, and that's their sole path, and that's their fucking business. And I always like commenting back with like inappropriate comments to just get them to just shut up. I say ridiculous things like, I don't know. I'm like, just be quiet. And I actually project back to them. I was like, interesting that you are so gung-ho on me having more children. I wonder what that is within you that doesn't feel like you're enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, what? Huh? And I'm like, shut up. Don't ask dumb questions. But yeah. And as I just get more brave, courageous. I don't know, where I'm just like, you're an idiot. Why would you say that?
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize it though. It's ignorance. And we all have some, we just need to be more mindful of it.
Yeah.
So Mercedes, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk forever about this, and maybe we'll have you on the podcast again when your conference is complete, and we'll see where the next chapter brings you and more discussion and all of that. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. Not just for having this conversation, but being that change. It takes a lot of, it takes, I don't want to say courage, to show up every day and to be that trailblazer and saying, no, this is where I want to, this is what I feel called to teach in the world, and actually do it. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I believe you're making a big impact and that you're just getting started.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and your calling to bring these discussions to the table. So thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, follow you, check you out, maybe attend next year's conference?
Yeah, so you can get started at shameproofparenting.com. That's where all of my blogs and social media links are. I'm all over the internet. So if you look up Mercedes Samudio or Shameproof Parenting, you should find it. And then if you're interested in knowing more about the conference, it is diversityandparentingconference.com.
Awesome. And what is your book is called Shame Proof Parenting. Where can they get a copy of that?
You can get a copy of that pretty much wherever books are sold. So I know it's on Barnes and Noble, it's on Amazon, and it's also an audiobook via Audible as well.
Thank you.